My brother didn't just laugh when I was handed Grandpa's old passbook. He took a thick, black permanent marker, the kind with that sharp chemical smell that burns your throat, and wrote the word 0 in giant, jagged letters across the leather cover. He pressed so hard the marker tip nearly tore through the vintage hide. Then, with a smirk that made my stomach twist, he tossed it into a greasy, half-empty pizza box. "There," Blake sneered, wiping his hands as if he'd touched something diseased. "Now the book matches your life, Hannah. A total worthless 0. My mother didn't stop him. She only adjusted her pearl necklace and sighed. "Don't be bitter, Hannah. Your brother is a CEO. He needs the estate to protect the Anderson legacy. You're just a senior legal secretary. What would you even do with a real inheritance?" I walked out of that mansion holding a stained pizza box and a heart that had finally turned to ice. But 3 days later, I stood inside the glass-walled office of a bank manager who was shaking so badly he couldn't even hold his pen. He didn't see a 0 on that cover. He saw a security sequence that hadn't been activated in 40 years. "Ms. Anderson," he whispered, his face turning the color of ash, as he pressed a button under his desk and spoke into the intercom. "Lock the front doors and don't let her leave." Then he looked back at me. "We found the execution order." At that moment, I realized my grandfather hadn't left me a gift. He had left me a loaded gun, and for the first time in my life, I was the one with my finger on the trigger. My family thought they had won the game by taking the mansions and the cars. They forgot one thing. Grandpa was a grandmaster at chess, and he just gave me the queen. My name is Hannah Anderson, and for 10 years, I've been the invisible daughter. In my family, your value was measured in the size of your portfolio and the speed of your car. My brother, Blake, was the golden boy, the high-flying CEO of Anderson Logistics, and my sister, Chloe, was the socialite, finding herself on a permanent vacation in Europe. Then there was me. I worked 60-hour weeks as a senior paralegal at a top-tier criminal defense firm. I was the one they called when they got a DUI or needed a contract cleaned up. I was the help. I was also the only one who spent the last 3 months of Grandpa Eugene's life by his bedside. I listened to the rhythmic wheeze of his oxygen machine while the rest of them were at charity galas. Grandpa was a quiet man, a retired forensic accountant who saw the world in columns of red and black. He knew people better than they knew themselves. In his final days, he'd grip my hand and whisper, "The truth is a slow-burn fire, Hannah. Most people run from it, but if you sit still, if you wait, it will consume the liars and leave only the gold." I thought he was losing his mind. I didn't realize he was giving me a blueprint. The day of the will reading was a calculated humiliation. We gathered in the study, a room that smelled of old money and expensive tobacco. Blake sat in Grandpa's leather chair, already acting like a king. The family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man I knew was on my mother's payroll, read the words, "To Blake, the company, to Chloe, the holdings, and to Hannah, a 1974 savings passbook and his collection of fountain pens." The room erupted, not in outrage, but in mockery. That was the moment Blake branded the book with that marker. I took the pens, I took the 0 book, and I left. I'm a paralegal. I don't argue. I build cases. That night, I sat at my desk and looked at the trash. I'm trained to look for what's hidden. I unscrewed the barrel of the 3rd fountain pen, a heavy, silver-capped masterpiece, and a small, laser-cut key fell out. It was engraved with a code, 88 Alpha. Then I looked at the passbook. It was old, but the binding was too thick. Using a surgical blade, I peeled back the leather lining. My heart skipped. Embedded in the cardboard was an ultra-thin RFID microchip. The bank on the cover, First Mercantile, was long gone. It had been absorbed by North Star Private Wealth, a firm that doesn't even have a sign on its building because its clients are too wealthy to want to be found. The next morning, I went to North Star. When the teller scanned that chip, the entire bank went silent. A low, rhythmic chime filled the room, and within 90 seconds, I was ushered into the private office of Arthur Sterling, the regional manager. "Ms. Anderson," he said, his voice thick with reverence. "Your grandfather was the man who designed our firm's original fraud detection systems. This passbook is what we call a dead man's switch. It wasn't designed to just hold money. It was designed to trigger a forensic audit of every name associated with the account holder." He opened a secure terminal. The account wasn't empty. Over 40 years of high-frequency trading had turned a small deposit into $22,117,000. But the real treasure was in Box 88 Alpha. Inside the vault, I found Grandpa's true legacy: a digital drive and a set of paper ledgers. Grandpa hadn't been retired. He had been a ghost inside the family servers. He had proof that my mother and Blake were laundering money through offshore shell companies. They had framed Grandpa years ago for a tax error to keep him quiet. He lived in a farmhouse while they lived in mansions because they had stolen his life. But he knew their weakness: greed, and he knew my strength: patience. I spent 48 hours in a fever dream of legal research. I had the evidence, but I knew the Anderson money could buy a lot of time in court. I needed a confession of judgment. I needed them to walk into the trap. I sent a group text: "Residual interest found in Grandpa's book. It's $22 million. I found a legal loophole to release it, but the bank requires a full family sign-off. Meet at the estate, bring your lawyers." They were there in record time. Greed is a powerful motivator. Blake was pacing like a caged animal. "All right, Hannah, enough with the games. Where's the money?" "It's right here," I said, placing a thick stack of documents on the table. But there's a catch. Because Grandpa was discredited years ago, the bank won't release the $22 million if there are any outstanding liabilities or fraud investigations against the company. It's a clean bill of health affidavit. You sign this swearing under penalty of perjury that the company's books are 100% accurate and the funds are released to us equally, 1/3 each. Blake grabbed the paper. He looked at his lawyer, a man who looked like he'd sell his own soul for a retainer. The lawyer skimmed it. "It's a standard indemnity waiver, Blake. If the company is clean, there's no risk." "Of course it's clean," Blake blurted out. I handed him the silver-capped pen, the pen that held the key. He signed with a flourish. My mother signed next. They thought they were signing for a life of luxury. They didn't realize they were signing a confession to Federal Statute 18 U.S.C., Parf 1001. By swearing the company was clean while knowing they had skimmed millions, they had just committed an active federal crime in front of a witness. They hadn't just claimed an inheritance. They had triggered their own destruction. The moment the ink was dry, I stood up and straightened my blazer. The air in the room felt heavy, like the moments before a lightning strike. "Okay, sis," Blake said, reaching for the folder. "Now where's our check?" "There is no check, Blake," I said softly. My mother's glass hit the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. "What are you talking about, you little brat?" "I'm a paralegal at a criminal defense firm, Mom," I said, my voice as cold as a grave. "I've spent 10 years watching people like you think they're smarter than the law. You just signed a sworn affidavit to a federally insured institution, and I have the digital drive from Box 88 Alpha that proves every word you just signed is a lie." Blake lunged for the papers, but the doors to the study were kicked open. 4 men in windbreakers with IRS CID printed on the back in bold yellow letters flooded the room. "Blake Anderson, Eleanor Anderson," the lead agent said. "We have a warrant for your arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and pension embezzlement. We also have a signed affidavit from 3 minutes ago that we'll be using as evidence of intent to defraud." The next hour was a blur of shouting and handcuffs. Blake was pinned to the floor. My mother was led out in her bathrobes, her pearls clashing against the steel of the cuffs. Chloe was left standing in the foyer, screaming that I had ruined the family. I looked at her. "The family was ruined 10 years ago, Chloe. I just finally called the janitor to clean up the mess. It's been 6 months since that day. Blake is currently serving a 9-year sentence in a federal facility. My mother lost every penny in restitution. The mansion, the cars, all seized. And me? I didn't keep the $22 million. I used the majority of it to pay back the employees' pensions my brother had stolen. I kept just enough to buy Grandpa's old farmhouse and turn it into a pro bono legal clinic. I still have that old passbook. I keep it on my desk with 0 still written on the front in that ugly marker. It reminds me every day that the people who try to make you feel like nothing are usually the ones who are terrified that you'll eventually realize you're everything. Grandpa was right. The truth is a slow burn. But man, it sure is bright when it finally lights up the room. If you think Hannah did the right thing by taking down her own family to save the innocent, hit that like button and subscribe. We need more stories of justice in this world. And tell me in the comments, if you found a secret inheritance today, who is the first person you'd cut out of your life? I'm reading every single comment. Thanks for watching, and remember, always check the fine print.